Thank you for the invitation to participate in this conference. The title of my presentation is Using Visual Arts to Enrich History Understanding. An essential and maybe surprising instrument for teaching history is art. Paintings, drawings, and photographs can convey a wealth of information about historical occurrences. By looking at how artists recorded the past, we can help students delve deeper into the circumstances that led to the events represented, analyzing the artist's viewpoints and decision-making, and evaluating them against other sources. Teaching history via art can also use visual materials to help students comprehend cultural viewpoints, assess historical events, and hone their critical thinking abilities. To make history interesting and relevant, educators can choose a variety of artworks, help students analyze themes, symbols, and expressive language, and relate the artwork to its historical setting. To assist students better, to become better historical thinker and foster fruitful conversation, we must first provide them with the information and time to understand how an artist's approach might affect our interpretation of historical events. Students can then learn about history through those observations, posing queries of their own, and discussing the links between art and history. Students' interest and comprehension would be further enhanced by interactive learning. This is precisely the goal of the Online Picasso project. I will discuss historical events in France around 1939-1940. Pablo Picasso had found refuge in the seaside resort of Royan on September 2nd, 1939, the eve of the declaration of war. There he joined his ex-companion, Maria Therese Walter, and their 5-year-old daughter, Maya. His new mistress, Dora Maar, a photographer he had met in 1935, accompanied him. In the early months of 1940, he leased a studio in Villa Les Voiliers. Picasso was quite prolific during these stressful months in Royan and would only settle back in Paris in August of that year. The intense nature of his work at this time provides a perfect reflection of life under the German occupation. Using recently uncovered correspondence, drafted poems, and artworks, we can analyze the impact the tragic events of this period had on Picasso's output, while also examining correlations between his literary and plastic creations and those events. The detailed interpretation of his works uncovers their true autobiographical nature, demonstrating a clear tendency in the artist to filter his experiences through his art. Picasso was closely attuned to events of the day in the summer of 1939, and he felt that an all-out war in Europe was imminent. Germany was on its way to take Danzig and start the conflict within 2 or 3 months. In early July, Picasso had made arrangements for Maria Therese and their daughter Maya to be driven to Royan. The resort town was located midway along France's Atlantic coast, looking out over the Bay of Biscay. He had stayed there in the summer of 1923, so he knew the place. Settled in the Villa Gerbier de Jean, mother and child would enjoy their seaside holiday and would moreover be as safe as anyone could be at a good distance from Paris if war were to suddenly break out. After mobilization was announced, Picasso surprisingly opted for returning to Paris. The large room where he had painted the Guernica mural was now emptied of all that could be safely stored away. Friends flocked to his studio the minute they had heard he was back in Paris. He was really worried. Britain and France had just signed a treaty with Poland promising military assistance should the Germans invade. What to do if war came? The front page of Le Matin described how shops were plunged into darkness. Drugs in the market had been requisitioned by the army in the interest of security. Phone calls to numbers outside Paris could only be made from post offices, and callers had to show proof of identity. As expected, Nazi troops entered Poland on September 1st. Suddenly, the streets of Paris were covered with posters informing the population of the decision to mobilize. Parisians, our country is in danger with its own freedom. As always, Parisians will do their duty while remaining cool, calm, and collected. They will all enthusiastically rally to the flag and defend the same ideal, Vive la France. 5 million Frenchmen enlisted. Simone de Beauvoir wrote in her diary, an elusive sense of horror underpinned everything in the here and now, and that lay ahead. You could not predict anything, imagine anything, or relate to anything. Persay recalled running into Picasso on the Boulevard Saint-Germain. He was a worried, distraught man who did not know what to do. He ordered crates, began to have his paintings rubbed, and packed. In the end, Picasso made the decision to rejoin Maria Therese and Maya, but he did so in the company of his new partner, Dora Maar. checking in the Hotel d'Autoré. Penrose describes the artist's quarters. The rooms in which he lived for the next few months were cramped and badly lit. The town itself, apart from its harbor, had few attractions. Accepting the situation, however, he settled down to a regular routine in which the main factor was work. Having left Paris with hardly any art supplies, he desperately scoured local shops to buy up whatever he could find. After a while, he decided to get a studio in the same villa where his daughter and her mother were staying. From young, Picasso closely followed the war developments. The appearance of rotted steer skulls and flayed sheep parts in his drawings reflect the future aftermath of the lethal conflict. In Sketchbook 42, on which he worked through October 29th through 30th, we see for the first time the motif of the female nude seen from behind, split in half like a butchered animal, her two profiles joined at the nape of the neck. Penrose proposes a psychological reading. The head is in varying degrees split in two, seeming to look both out into the world and into itself, with apprehensive, tear-filled eyes. Picasso confessed that many of his drawings were portraits of Dora. In Femme au Chapon, she holds on her lap the head of a skin lamb, similar to those he used to give to his Afghan hound. The way she is holding the blood-soaked head sends a chill down the spine, as two of her fat fingers stick through the two openings, one from the eye socket and the other from the mouth. While she might remind us of the Pietà holding Christ's dead body on her lap, this is a nightmare vision, a negation of the traditional iconography of the Virgin Mary. Moreover, the head combines human and animal elements, as can be seen more clearly in the later painting based on the drawing that we see here illustrated. This indicates a close relationship between the lamb skull and the woman, and hence a foreboding of her own death. Simultaneously, her emphatically upright posture and an anachronistic long robe give the figure the terrible appearance of a primitive death goddess, clearly recalling the negative aspects of the Magna Mater, her representations in ancient Mediterranean culture. As Ulmer comments, what we're looking at is not the face of a person, but the physiognomy of an epoch, and that was marked by excessive destruction. The previous animal carcasses led to pictures of tortured and monstrously deformed women like Femme au Chapeau Bleu. Mars' bust is no longer really human here. Its body, puffed and woven head, or its rhomboid neck create a kind of scarified effigy. The hysterical crisis of the folie erotique promoted by the surrealists, often embodied in a broken body, found a certain resonance here. Beauty will be convulsive or will not be, Breton had said. After war broke out, he came to portray Dora more and more frequently as a sacrificial victim, a tearful symbol of his own pain and grief at the horror of tyranny and war. In the course of events, it is hardly surprising that the poor woman became increasingly traumatized and at the end of the war suffered a severe nervous breakdown. On October 4th, Picasso painted the oils to the Femme and Crâne de Mouton, almost equating the suffering represented by both. The face was reduced to an assemblage of multicolored triangles shaped like the muzzle of an animal, thus contaminating the human city with a bestial quality. In the second painting, one finds at once a realistic, even naturalistic purpose in the rendering of the details, and a desire for expressiveness, which is translated as much in the color as in the brush stroke. The composition is particularly bare. Its abstract background with a gradient of tones ranging from gray, brown to ochre yellow gives a subtle illusion of death. The skull, coarsely cut and in a dominant red, stands out. Showing its sharp teeth like an infernal grinding machine, it simultaneously suggests violence and pain. Death is omnipresent, reflected in each point of the painting through the severe linear strokes and the bleeding pigments. Through the sheep's head, a poor and derisory object, he shouts his fear and vulnerability. Bernardac sees an antecedent for it in Francisco de Goya. There is something about the pain expressed in the wide open mouth and the black circles for eyes that suggests the influence of the Spanish artist, in particular the agonized victims facing the fire squad on the 3rd of May 1808 at the Museo del Prado. On October 26th, Picasso started Sketchbook 21, which he completed on September 19, 1940. It is a magnificent example of fluctuation between drawing and writing, the two media sometimes facing each other or alternating as we leaf through. The notebook, of a small size so that he could keep it in his pocket and have it always at hand, also contained the first outlines of poems, offering multiple variants, sometimes repeated several times in almost identical organization, with erasures and additions being the norm. One of the drawings in it was closely related to the oil Dora Maar, Assis, in which he confronted the viewer with wide, sparkling eyes would compete with the stars of the garish wallpaper behind her, as we see here illustrated. She assumes her role of the prophetess, the Cassandra, displaying the frantic frustration of a seer who can't foretell the future but is cursed by fate not to be heard. Only Picasso listens to her warnings, making her the medium through whom the project current and future events. In Tête de Femme au Chapeau Mauve, Dora widens her eyes like a Byzantine icon, mesmerized, staring in disbelief at something unknown, but certainly ominous and terrifying, a clear and present danger, some vast horror lurking in a more distant future. Again, he's transformed into a modern Sibyl, but one does not speak, turning head into a silent, oracular presence whose facial expression of inner distress is her prophecy. The spiky configuration of her lips and the thin parting of the mouth underscore her speechless state. During these increasingly distressing years, he coerced her mysterious and inscrutable impassive visage into a reflection of the ominous and troubled mood in Europe, wreaking an unsparingly brutality on her visage, contriving some shocking new pictorial identity for her. With the war less than 2 months old, she appears to be staring at the face of something far more calamitous than ever before, a catastrophe of a scale hitherto unprecedented and unimaginable. A huge yellow stain marks Dora's cheek. A month later, the Nazis would require all Jews living in their jurisdiction to wear a yellow Star of David. In the portrait of Dora he painted at the end of the month, Le Chant des Gens, she resembled a flat board, as an African sculpture, and is composed of segments. The mask-like double visage underlined the idle character of the figure. This is what Picasso himself called a conjuring picture, that is, an expression through which he tried to relieve himself of his fear of a world menace by objectifying his anxiety in his pictures. Indeed, feelings of fear and alienation for one's particular environment, of a narrowing of one's sentient world, soon spread across France. Anticipation of a close encounter with the enemy and possibly occupation called for a recalibration of psychological as well as physical sense of time. Beauvoir often spoke in her diary of feeling out of time. She wrote, "For the last 2 months, I had lived my life simultaneously in the infinite and in the moment. I had to feel the time minute by minute, or long hours at a time, but entirely without a tomorrow." On December 24th, he composed the long poem La Boîtier au Dour, which includes lines like "Night disgorges itself in the azure," "The emptiness of the sky with its angles lit," "The emptiness of the night, of the sky, empty of caresses and of loves." The next day he wrote another, Le Charbonnier les Draps, which read, "On the torn skin of the house, clacking at the window forgotten at the center of the infinite emptiness, the black honey of the ripped sheet, by the icy flames of the sky, the eagle vomits its wings." Clear suggestions of the impending disaster. In a third one, he played the similar concepts, adding a sense of claustrophobia. The wall advances very quickly to receive the arms of the cast shadow. The wall rushes at the call and clings to the willing shadow. The house empties its guts on the sky. According to Gassman, Picasso encounter with cosmic silence revitalized his ineffable belief in a voiceless mystic entity marking the final stage of his journey towards an ever deeper knowledge of the world. This encounter with the mute infinite center was for him a form of ingress into reality. Through his art, Picasso sought to find the means of mastering horror, revealing it, denouncing it, depicting it, and stripping it bare. On January 3rd, he met with André and agreed to rent from her the apartment at Le Voilier with a studio on the seafront. The well-lit rooms were sparsely furnished, but he did not waste any time piling it all sorts of other pieces brought at second-hand shops. In a poem from January 5th, he was beginning to question the future of his relationship with Dora, well, due to the stress that they were going through. A pretty figure, even that of a beloved woman, is only a game of solitaire, the symptom of the foreshadowing of the heap of strangled threads of a system to be set up no matter what on the far-fetched plans of the so delicious perfume, be it on the heap of shit and the colors of the floodlight lead blossom, the pink that has to be drawn in the frozen ashes of the angles and of the arches before chance doesn't materialize. In another poem, Un Symptôme, in which he tangled threads of fate are already predicted to drag him and Dora through pain, a symptom that denies the diversity of trajectories, a blow so tangled in networks of colored threads, of a frequency more or less accelerated by the metronome of plus or minus, terrific heat going from well-being to pain, the picture predicted by all the oracles already marked by red, fire at the desired point of the map. From January 10th through May 26th, Picasso worked on sketchbook 217, which contains many studies of female heads and women sitting in chairs. Whereas the golden presence of Maria Therese had inspired joy and sense of well-being in the early 1930s, the dark-haired Dora now served as more fitting muse for the exorcist rituals that Picasso required in his art as he dealt with the devastation and unbridled violence around him. In these portrayals, as Freeman states, the strokes of his hand mirror the thoughts in his mind. Beneath the rich glowing colors, flag decorative forms, and arching arabesques, Picasso hints at a fragile temporality and outlines a host of personal anxieties as he watches the world around him descend into chaos. He left Royan on February 5th for a long stay in Paris. He took advantage of these visits to settle administrative formalities. The impression of the desolate city left on him was reflected in a poem, La Nuit Arrachée, the night so brutally snatched from the evaporating sky, torn up by so many pins, the whiteness of his linens found itself bleeding drop by drop in the echo of the stone thrown in the well. By the end of the month, he was back in Royan. His unsettled mode of life made it impossible for him to paint large-scale canvases. Yet he worked with greater fervor than usual, filling page after page of his sketchbooks with rapid pencil drawings. He had set a new production record even for himself when he completed 71 drawings in a single 2-day period the previous month. On May 10th, continuous German aerial attack on the Netherlands and Belgium was followed by invasion. Having immediately beaten French and British troops that had come to offer their support, Hitler told the Reichswehr that the decisive hour had come. For 300 years, it was the aim of the English and French rulers to prevent every real consolidation of Europe, and above all, to hold Germany in weakness and impotency, he wrote. Extra French forces were duly dispatched north to engage with the enemy in accordance with the established contingency plans. 2 days later, the Nazi Blitz conquest of the entire country began. During Operation Fallgelb, 134,000 foot soldiers, 1,222 tanks, and nearly 40,000 trucks, the greatest traffic jam known to that date in Europe, steadily made their way through the forest valleys of the Ardennes and then along the Somme Valley, pushing relentlessly towards the river Meuse, and in four slow-moving columns, each nearly 250 miles long, cutting off and surrounding the Allied units, which had advanced into Belgium to meet the expected invasion. Through the end of June, the army would courageously fight the advancing enemy, suffering high casualties. In the month and a half that the Battle of France lasted, between 55,000 and 65,000 French and colonial troops had met their death, and maybe as many as 120,000 had been wounded. Almost 2 million had been taken prisoner. Parisians who remained in the city were determined to carry on as normal, as if doing so would somehow make the war go away. Due to government censorship, people were not even aware that plans to establish a line of defense from the Somme to the Maginot Line had been abandoned, and they did not know that the army had failed to take Abbeville-Amiens, Laon, Rethel, but they saw waves of refugees arriving in the region, not just Belgians, but also ever increasing numbers of French people, both military and civilian, who were fleeing south. On June 4th, Picasso made studies of the oil Grand Noisys as part of Sketchbook 21, in which the female figure took on hitherto unimagined forms. Many of the pages were also literally dotted with poems across, out, or left incomplete. Both text and graphic often coexist on the same page. In both cases, incessant repetition, modification, and inversion became the norm, resembling a cante hondo in Spanish, singing for its weave and improvisation. This can be seen in the poem La beauté qui s'évapore. The beauty that evaporates from his hands sets down its dewiness in the sewer system, climbing flowers, elbowing under the green rug of the linden. The acrid emanation of the lilac cloth, the flames raise after the braid that consumes itself in a spiral. 2 days later, German forces crossed the Somme and reached a town just 75 miles north of Paris. In an emergency response from 10,000 French soldiers were placed about 30 miles north of the city, together with 200 guns and 30 assault tanks. As a possible reaction to the feared impending attack, many of Picasso's depicted heads lost some of their flesh, as we can see in the illustrations. The bone structure or the bone itself became invisible. Lips no longer covered the teeth, and there was a vacant look in the eyes. On June 4th, he made, so as you can see here in this painting. As the invading army was just 90 miles from Paris, the Third Republic had its last cabinet meeting on June 9th. Newspaper and radio stations attempted to bolster anti-German sentiments and stifle the resolve of Parisians, describing the Nazis as barbarian hordes. The next day, in a letter dispatched from Paris to Royan, Zervos informed Picasso, "Here it is starting to get worse. It's been 2 nights that I have not closed my eyes as the gunshots are approaching. And I was about to mail this letter. I met a soldier coming from Gisors. He tells me that the Germans did not enter the town, but that they did but what they did was beyond imagination. It seems that nothing has been left standing and that the town is in complete ruins." That same day, Picasso made the drawing Bouche de Femme, where Dora was clothed in muddy green against a brownish background, as we see here illustrated, a color scheme suggestive of the German uniform. German troops entered Paris on June 14. It happened almost suddenly. The city had lost 60% of its population, and aside from the invading army vehicles, its streets were empty. Soldiers took up positions in front of the ministries and army buildings, while senior officers installed themselves in the city's best hotels. So you can see here the marching German soldiers and the reaction of the Germans at the bottom. They soon established their bases at the Hotel de Louvre. The commando was led by SS Major Helmut Nochen. Their purpose was to keep an eye on the right ideological enemies, especially Jews, communists, anti-Nazi Germans, and Freemasons. At first, Picasso did not paint anything directly related to the new circumstances. One must consider that as a foreigner in an invaded country, a supporter of the Republicans in Spain, and a degenerate artist, he was also already considered a prime suspect. In accordance to Dora's Kafkaesque personality, Picasso would often portray his lover trapped in a room, imprisoned behind bars, or constrained to a chair against a dark and somber green background, as we see here illustrated from June in a painting from June 16. Although distorted, she is immediately recognizable as Dora Maar. Her large sickle moon-shaped eyes, mournful, delicately edged with crimson to suggest they are red from crying. As Walter states, the value and authenticity of the picture is achieved through the unceasing timeliness of suffering. The work is dominated by pain and horror, not as a momentary phenomenon, but the ever-present dark side of human life. The color and outlines are by no means harmonious. Rather, they create a confrontational atmosphere. The armistice was signed on June 22nd at Redon. near Compiègne by Pétain, on terms dictated exclusively by Germany. France was to be divided into an occupied zone, as you see in the map, in the north and west, and an unoccupied zone in the south. The following day, a jubilant Hitler toured the capital in the company of architect Albert Speer and sculptor Arno Breker. He wanted to see examples of the city's past to understand how he had arrived at the center of the world's urban imagination. Two major strategies of the occupation were to keep Paris in stasis as an example of an ideal metropolis and to undermine its most distinctive trait, its porosity, that is, its openness to liberal ideas and to outsiders. That same day, the German army entered Royan. His first glimpse of the occupying troops was probably from the terrace of the Hotel du Tir, where he lived. The High Command set up his headquarters in the Hotel de Paris, next to his atelier at the Ville that he shared with Maria Therese. He again considered leaving town, but came to the conclusion that it would be a hassle to move the bulk of his art, always his primary concern, and to transplant his many complicated personal relationships into foreign exile, notwithstanding the many offers from abroad. By early July, Petain's collaboration with his government had been installed at Vichy. He and the future deputy Pierre Laval had spotted the town's suitability as a seat of government. Situated in the center of the country, only 30 miles from the demarcation dividing occupied and unoccupied zones, it was just a few hours away from Paris by road or rail. The environment created by Pétain regime was one of secrecy, veiled discourses, manipulative statements, suspicions, and double talk. This might explain the level of complexity that we see in Picasso's poem, for example, La Corrida, where we read, "Wings of the sky with blood puddings are placed in a region between earth and heaven." To understand his conception of evil existing above the earth and directing his air fleets aggressively towards the earth below, it is necessary to follow his trajectory from hell to heaven in a cosmographical diagram that he drew, as you can see here on the left-hand side. In Picasso's diagrams, the infernal center is shown without commentary as a dot-like black point enclosed in a circle sphere, described by him as the global of the earth, itself the center of the surrounding spheres of the universe, whose diameter gradually increases to culminate in the largest, all-containing, outermost cosmic ring, called by him the cielo, the heaven. The center of evil in the diagrams is confronted by the militant forces of good, portrayed as an armed but immaculate white lily which climbs on all four the ladder of the roof, wallowing between the sky's daggers and honey fritters, and with the wings of her scissors, she is cutting the strings of the globe that falls face down on the sky and bursts. And this is in the poem Azucena que sube. In his paintings also, the cramped, low ceilings, stripped down interiors, opaque, austere, and grayish forms express the material and psychological confinement in which beings and objects are condemned to suffer. Asphyxiation is watching, Servos wrote to him desperately on August 8th. And a few days earlier, the city is dead, almost petrified. Here life is extremely sad, a griselle that suffocates, the country is emptied of everything. Servos continued to keep Picasso informed of the situation in the capital, letting him know, for instance, that the Spanish embassy had posted notices on the doors of Picasso's apartment and his studio, and also in his studio, placing both under its protection. The stress the artist was living under was reflected in one of the most unhinged pages of his sketchbook that we see here on the left-hand side. And you can see it's kind of full of all kinds of skulls and so on and so forth. These might be influenced also by Dora's earlier photo collage and invading and threatening eyeballs we see throughout. The artist feared to be classified as a Jew himself and get the brutal treatment he witnessed in others, especially foreign Jews. As early as the 1920s, Pablo's ethnic background had been questioned by art historians like Elie Faure. While recognizing his intellectual influence on European painting, the critic had accused him of being a Mediterranean in which Semitic blood prevailed. Could Picasso be Jewish? He had asked. On July 28th, in another move against outsiders, the French government instructed the Paris police to order all foreigners over 15 living in the same department to register with the authorities by August 6th. A couple of days later, he received another letter from Servos. We're suffocating. I feel overwhelmed now, especially since, as you know, we are cut off from any postal services within an occupied zone. In Royan, you at least have the sea, air, light. Here we are in prison. We hear nothing but except about food, bread. There is almost nothing to eat, and people are starting to find it difficult. In a desperate attempt to reduce consumption, the government decreed at this point that bread could go on sale only 24 hours after it had been baked, when it was already starting to go stale. Very soon, with shelves on the shops ever more depleted and queues outside increasingly common and growing longer by the day, they started introducing even further restrictions. Picasso made one of the rare self-portraits of the period in two pencil drawings from August 11th. In the latter that we see here illustrated, this head burst out of his collar, his eyes bulging, the pupils dilated more than from helplessness than fear. The realization that the occupation might be a direct threat to his life precipitated an intense self-examination. He depicted himself with a very serious expression, not looking directly at the viewer, as though to shield his private thoughts from an interrogator. Under the weight of the framing power of the Nazis, in this airless environment, artists and intellectuals who stayed in France had a very thin margin in which to work. Picasso saw nothing but evil all around. The eye in the air, he wrote, of the inimical winged bull was not so much an idea, a cosmological abstraction for him, but a perception of a presence that he could see face to face. He obtained it for the first time to illustrate precisely the singularity of the infernal well and its resident, the cosmic winged bull that he saw as evil, the black mouth swelling in the flayed flesh of the well torn out from the bottom of the bull's eye, flying like a ball without interruption from the sky to the earth and from the earth to the sky. In three unusually disturbing texts written between August 17th and 19th, as if in a trance, hypnotically suspended between consciousness and sleep, he absentmindedly kept on repeating one single phrase: tomorrow, Sunday, in the Cartagena bull ring at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Weather permitting, there will be a bullfight, referring to the cyclical return of the corrida, a symbol for the war that was being waged all around him. On August 15th, early in the morning, in front of the Hotel de Golf, a German sentinel guarding the Kommandatur had been gunned down. Late that afternoon, that apparent stray bullet had come flying through Pablo's dining room window on the main floor below his studio. The situation became extremely tense. Some individuals, perhaps engaged in pre-resistance activities, had several times cut one of the main electrical cables near Royan. German authorities had threatened capital punishment and warned that they would take hostages to guarantee the cessation of sabotage. On that same day, he made a series of drawings of the cafe that we see here illustrated in front of his residence, transforming what began as realistic depiction into a more abstract, turbulent image. The completed painting that we see here alluded to his growing disenchantment with the town under Nazi control through his use of acid tone colors, mixing yellow with violet, blue and green with orange. Picasso feared that in a community so much smaller than Paris, he was all the more conspicuous as a foreigner. Although Petain's regime was based in Vichy in the south, it also had responsibilities all over the occupied zone. To maintain order, it counted on a traditional network of prefects who provided Vichy with crucial information about the occupation's increasingly hostile reaction to the occupation. So Picasso returned to Paris on August 25th. Life in the capital was slow. The artist divided his time between his studio that we see here illustrated and the Catalan, a restaurant that he frequented. It reminded him of his homeland, both in ambience and cuisine. Although he was under surveillance, he was not extremely worried about the German authorities. On October 2nd, on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, press announcements and leaflets distributed near synagogues informed Jews that they had to register at their local police station by the end of the month. The same directives ruled that Jewish business owners had until then to display a yellow poster on their premises identifying them. We must not forget that Picasso was often called a Jew, even though he was not. The malicious rumor continued circulating that Picasso was Jewish. The critic Florian Fels, for instance, claimed Max Jacob, who was his most intimate friend, told me that Picasso was half Jewish. 3 days after the statue became effective, he wrote a poem, or Tercera Chorreando, which contained the line, "Go between dripping buttery ditches, from the mall filled with the blue of Mother Celestina's powders." One may wonder if his reference to La Celestina, the masterpiece of Fernando de Rojas, who was of Semitic descent, was not related to the doomed fate of French Jews. Many of Picasso's friends who had stayed until now made up their mind to leave the city. In mid-October, Breton informed him in a postcard of his decision to take off for New York. That same day, Picasso wrote Las calles cuelgan, which includes the line, "The streets hanging from the sky, poised at the edge." He was probably feeling even more insecure and off balance with the recent regulations imposed on all foreigners. After all, he discovered his emotions through what he saw in his portraits of other people, or at least what they reflected back to him through the intermediary of painting. One who serves as such a mirror was Dora, prone as she was to calamity. She reacted intensely to all of the discriminatory regulations and followed in the news closely as a member of a relatively well-informed intellectual milieu. He had only to watch her reaction to know what he was like, although hers were even stronger and traumatized. On October 18th, a German order placing a sequestration of businesses and property belonging to all Jews absent or arrested, known as the Aryanization Ordinance, was announced in Le Journal Officiel. 2 days later, the authorities announced that by the end of December, any Jewish-owned businesses opening onto the streets would have to be sold or placed in the hands of non-Jewish commissioner administrators. Once this had been done, a red poster had to replace the yellow one. We cannot forget that Picasso's main dealer at the time was Kahnweiler, who was a German Jew. And so his gallery was also confiscated. Nazi informers were everywhere. They were closely watching Picasso's studio, hoping to catch the Jewish sculptor Lipschitz, who had already escaped to America anyway, or other suspicious visitors. There was gossip making the rounds that Mar was also part Jewish. Picasso had heard reports that Franco's fascist thugs were active in Paris, forcibly repatriating wanted Republican exiles for a certain death sentence or life at hard labor. As the titular former director of the Museo del Prado under the deposed government, Picasso had been formally accused of looting the nation's cultural patrimony under the guise of authorized protective custody of the Spanish masterpieces abroad. Late in the month, he was singled out among other artists in John Hemming Frye's Art Décadent, a fascist attack on modern art in general, and the purportedly degenerate influence of communism on the young people. The classical painter claimed that the moderns, who had privileged form at the expense of the subject, had neglected the conventional genres, particularly the portrait and the self-portrait, believed to assure man his dignity, had displayed these features of vulgarity and obscenity that revealed instead the dual shortcomings of model and artist. Despite the dangers Picasso faced during the early years of the Nazi invasion, he refused to be part of the cohort of European intellectuals who had left for America, like Breton I just mentioned, the support of Varian Gray and the Emergency Rescue Committee. Oh, I do not like giving into force. I am here. I'm staying here. I will stay here no matter what. So, cast into internal exile, he submerged himself in his work, frankly painting day after day, as if a silent protest against the attempt to silence him. As we are thankful for that, as he left an invaluable testimony of this period, as we're reading. Writing on Picasso's importance in this respect, Barr noted his very existence in in Paris encouraged the resistance artists, poets, and intellectuals who gathered in his studio or about his cafe table. Picasso's presence during the occupation became a tremendous occult importance. His work has become a sort of banner for the resistance movement. And I want to finish my presentation by mentioning again the Online Picasso project, where we see all of these historical events and all of Picasso's output combined. So you can analyze the circumstances of his life with the work. And after all, it was Picasso himself who said, in a quote, "It is not enough to know an artist's works. One must also know what he did, when he did them, why, how, in what circumstances." And I attempt to leave as complete a documentation as possible for posterity. Thank you.